So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured like many poor Europeans for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. The whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't want to kill them all. You had to do the work yourself. You had to build your own levee, build your own house. No. Pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land. Not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land. Just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination. But we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the west. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No. They're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it, if I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low-income person. But they were told, if these people are freed, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open.
I don't know this, but would you believe me if I told you that whiteness is a tool that was invented? Whiteness is a concept that was never there. It is a tool that was invented by the slave masters and the colonizers and the puppeteers to make sure that people of color are always on chains. There's a guy, a very powerful guy in terms of speech. He's also powerful because he's a very, very popular lawyer in the United States of America. His name is Tim Wise. Tim Wise is a white anti-racist activist, and the way he explains the original of whiteness will make you realize that we Africans, or we people of color among other people, are always bought. There's this idea that has been bought by us. We paid money to buy the idea that we are inferior and some other people who have white complexion are superior. This disease has even been shown within Africans themselves. Anybody who is approaching to look like the puppeteer, the colonizer, the slave master is always considered superior. But anybody who is close to the puppet, to the colonized, to the slave, is always considered inferior. This is because skin color, like the one you are seeing me wearing on, is considered not so good by some other Africans. But if you have a light skin, if you are white in color, close to the white person, the better you are, the better human you are. But it's just a fallacy. It's a cognitive bias that we all have. So without further ado, I want us to jump into this video, listen to what Tim Wise has to say about the origin of whiteness, and then I'll give you my thoughts towards the end of the video. Without further ado, let's dive in right away.
Of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland. Highlanders and Lowlanders just fought the hell out of each other. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border? Is that really what we believe? We know that if that border is closed, it isn't going to be closed to capital. It isn't going to be closed to goods. If you have a border that can be crossed by capital looking for the highest return on investment, or goods looking for the highest price, but labor is chained to its country of origin, how is that going to work to the benefit of working people? By definition, it doesn't. By definition, it immiserates the working class. Divide and conquer. But the best example of all, perhaps, in the contemporary era, in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina. Here you have two communities that were the most hard hit. The lower Ninth Ward, mostly black community, 94% African American, about 40% official poverty rate, heavy working class community. And right across the canal, St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, 95% white, also working class, high levels of poverty, economically very similar. And at the end of the day, in those first few days of September 2005, more similar than they probably would have realized. Because when those levees broke, they all got their stuff jacked. They all got their stuff destroyed. But if you had asked white folks in Chalmette, and I've done it, who was the cause of the problems in the greater New Orleans area prior to that flooding, they would have pointed across that canal at those black folks, wouldn't have called them black folks, and would have said, there, that's the problem. 70% of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the irony? The irony is that while they were blaming black people for their problems, while they were blaming black people for the conditions of the greater New Orleans area in which they lived, nobody was paying attention, least of all they, to the fact that these white elite politicians, either in Baton Rouge or in Washington, whose job it was to secure those levees, to make sure that levee funds were spent in the proper way and that they were spent at all, those mostly white and mostly elite politicians did nothing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just the black folks in the lower Ninth Ward they didn't care about. They really couldn't have given a rat's ass about those poor and working class white folks either. And yet, when the people of Chalmette, people of St. Bernard Parish got back into session, first time they had a city council meeting, parish council meeting after the flooding, the lights aren't even on yet. The water isn't even hooked up. And the first order of business was to pass an ordinance saying that you couldn't rent property in St. Bernard Parish to anyone who wasn't a blood relative. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before. But now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a damn good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that, that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply. You can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now, they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatening, they got rid of the ordinance. But my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time, and march on Baton Rouge and march on D.C. and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
Now, here is something that you should know. After watching this video and listening to Tim Wise, Tim Wise, he's indeed wise. He's Tim Wise. Tim Wise with wisdom. Now, in the ongoing discourse surrounding race and racism, understanding the origin of whiteness is paramount to dismantling the system of oppression. For us to dismantle the system of oppression, we should understand the origin of whiteness. What is whiteness? Because we have a difference between white and whiteness. We have a difference between race and racism. There is such a huge difference. And unfortunately, many of us don't seem to realize the differences that there is. Tim Wise is a prominent anti-racist activist. He provides invaluable insights into the historical construction of whiteness and its enduring impact on the society. Drawing on relevant examples to illuminate the origin of whiteness and its role in perpetuating inequality, this is what I'm going to say.
To illuminate the origin of whiteness and its role in perpetuating inequality, this is what I'm going to say.
So, here is what we need to know. The social construction of a race. Tim Wise has emphasized that race is not biological reality, but a social construct rooted in power dynamics and historical context. Whiteness in particular emerged as a category designed to confer privilege and superiority upon certain groups while marginalizing others. Through colonization, through slavery, and imperialism, European powers constructed whiteness as a marker of superiority, entrenching racial hierarchies that persist to this day. Even Africans are practicing whiteness among themselves. Africans who are black are practicing whiteness among themselves. This shows you how much this disease has entrenched into the African culture itself. Colonialism and the invention of whiteness, Colonial expansion provided the fertile grounds for the invention of whiteness. As European colonizers sought to justify the exploitation and domination of a non-white people by othering indigenous population and Africans, Europeans constructed a myth of racial superiority to justify their subjugation. The invention of whiteness served as a tool of oppression, enabling colonizers to rationalize their exploitation and maintain control over colonized territories. That's the second point. The third one would be slavery and the reinforcement of whiteness. The institution of slavery in the Americas further solidified the concept of whiteness as a marker of privilege and power. Slaveholders relied on racial division to justify the brutal exploitation of African slaves, perpetuating the myth of white superiority to justify their inhuman treatment. Whiteness became synonymous with freedom and opportunity, while blackness was equated with bondage and inferiority, reinforcing racial hierarchies that continues to shape society today. Society in the United States of America, how black Americans or African Americans or African diaspora are treated outside Africa and inside Africa. The funny part is that how Africans are treating same Africans. with the same oppressive laws that were placed on us by the colonizer, by the slave master, and by the puppeteers. Africans are even worse than these people who placed these rules of oppression. You know? The fourth point will be this: contemporary manifestation of whiteness. Tim Wise argues that the legacy of whiteness persists in contemporary society, albeit in subtle forms, from disparities in wealth and opportunities to the criminal justice system, disproportionate impact on the community of color. The enduring legacy of whiteness continues to shape societal structures and perpetuate inequality. Even seemingly neutral institutions such as education and empowerment are often rife with implicit bias and systemic barriers that disadvantage non-white individuals. And the people who are most disadvantaged, who are non-white individuals, are the black people. The black people in USA, the black people in London, in UK, the black people in Asia, the black people in Southern America, and ironically, the black people in Africa. And the person who is even doing it harder is the African himself. Africans sometimes don't love fellow Africans. It's a psychological thing. People are striving to look white. If you're black, you're ugly. If you're black, you're ugly. If you're white, you're beautiful. People have forgotten the concept of black is beauty. Black beauty. No. Even men are chasing white women. Or any woman that is close to white. That is what people do. It's a psychological thing. It's a psychological problem we got. You know? And Tim Wise, being a white anti-racist activist, is saying it for what it is. He's white. He knows what his people does, and he's against it. You get it? Now, we've seen the contemporary manifestation of whiteness and how non-white people are treated. We have non-white people so many. The Hispanics, we have the Asians, we have many of these. But all these people are close to white. The person who is farthest from white is black. Black Africa. At least Africa is the place where you should come and face homelessness. You should face welcome. You should face love. You should face self-esteem. You should face self-love. And some Africans who are mind colonized are still working so hard to make it hard for fellow Africans. Where then do you think the African American will go? Just ask yourself. Where will the black person go? Where will the African American go? Where will the African go if the fellow African whom I thought I could trust them, they don't like me? Africans don't like African Americans. African Americans don't love fellow African Americans. Africans don't love fellow Africans. On the lines of what? On the lines of whiteness. I'm speaking on the lines of whiteness. This is a psychological problem that has to be brought to an end. Listen, guys, it has to be brought to an end. The initiative starts with you. It starts with me. That is where it starts. Now, the fifth point, according to my research, is this: challenging whiteness and building a more just society. Wise's analysis underscores the importance of confronting whiteness and dismantling system of oppression to create a more equitable society. This necessitates not only acknowledging the historical roots of whiteness, but also actively working to challenge its manifestation in the present day. Through anti-racist education, advocacy, and allyship, individuals can contribute to the dismantling of whiteness and the creation of a more just and inclusive world. We just work together. Michael Jackson once said, "They don't care about us. They don't care about us." who are these they? We know us, but who are these they? Us with the you. But who are these they? Do you know them? Them folks. At least Africans should love one another. Or black people, we should love one another. That's the whole idea. Where we have unity, we have strength. Where we don't have unity, there's weakness. And it's easy to attack where there's a weakness, you know? So to conclude, team-wise exploration of the origin of whiteness offers critical insights into the historical construction of race and its enduring impact on the African society. By understanding the roots of whiteness, we can begin to unravel its pervasive influence and work towards building a more equitable future for all of us. As we confront the legacy of whiteness and strive for racial justice, we must heed the advice from Team Wise and call to action and commit ourselves to the ongoing struggle for equality and liberation. At least we have a brother who is white who is talking against racism. It shouldn't be a surprise. A human should not be thanked for doing what a human should do. What basically a human should do. It's our responsibility as humans to make sure that justice is served. But now we've made justice such a huge privilege for you to be served justice. Justice is every human right. It's not a privilege. It's a every human right. We only give thank you to thank them for their initiative, for their time they took. But it shouldn't be a privilege that big, no. Justice is a factor, is a responsibility of all human beings. And that has been said by Evans from Kenya. Yeah. That's all for today, guys. If you enjoy my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give the video a super thanks, subscribe, share the video with your friends, you know. We want more Africans to be proud of themselves. Give me a super thanks, join my Patreon, become a member of the channel. And remember to stay African. Love yourself. Love yourself. See you in the next one.